The city shone like a blanket of artificial stars under the dark sky. From the penthouse of a skyscraper, Marcos held a glass of whiskey as he looked out over the metropolis below. His reflection in the window was that of a powerful man, impeccable suit, well-combed hair, and an expression of absolute confidence. He had it all, or at least he thought so. His phone vibrated on the marble table. He didn't bother to check it right away. He already knew who the message was from. Anna, his wife, or rather the woman he'd shared years of marriage with without ever really seeing her. With an impatient sigh, he unlocked the screen. "Marcos, can we talk? I need you to listen to me." He rolled his eyes and put the phone aside. Talk? Listen to her? What for? So she could tell him the same old thing, that she was distant, that she didn't pay attention to him, that money couldn't replace love. Nonsense. He had given her a life of luxury, the best clothes, jewelry, a house with a view of the ocean. What more could she want? Anna was too simple, too soft for his world. At his side at events, she was overshadowed by more sophisticated women. Her kindness and humility did not fit in with high society. While he closed multi-million-dollar deals, she talked about helping others, about values and feelings. He did not understand it, and honestly, he had never made the effort to understand her. That night when he came home, Anna was waiting for him in the living room. Her gaze was calm, but there was pain in her eyes. "Marcos, we need to talk." He poured himself another drink before answering. "If it's to repeat the same old thing, spare me, Anna." She sighed and approached cautiously. "I can't go on like this. I'm not part of your life. I just occupy a space in it." Marcos let out a short, ironic laugh. "Anna, always so dramatic." But this time, she was not intimidated by his sarcasm. "I want a divorce." Silence fell between them like an abyss. Marcos looked at her, incredulous. He never thought Anna would have the courage to say those words, but there she was, staring at him with determination. "Do what you want," he replied indifferently, although inside something was stirring. Anna looked at him one last time before she left, and with her departure, something in the luxurious apartment felt empty. However, Marcos didn't give it much thought. For him, it was just the closing of an insignificant chapter. There were too many distractions in the world to waste time mourning the departure of a woman who, according to him, was never up to his standards. He toasted in solitude, celebrating his newfound freedom. What he didn't know was that life would soon teach him that all the money in the world couldn't fill the void he was about to discover. Anna walked through the brightly lit streets with her suitcase in her hand and a heavy heart. The cold night wind caressed her face, but the emptiness in her chest was even colder. She didn't have a clear plan. She only knew that she couldn't stay in that golden cage where she never felt seen. She found refuge in the small house of her friend Laura, who welcomed her with open arms. "I knew this day would come," Laura said as she made him some hot tea. "I don't know how you put up with it so much." Anna looked down, feeling a mixture of sadness and relief. "Because I loved him. Because I believed he could change." Laura took her hand lovingly. "Now is your time to change, Anna. It's your chance to start over." The first few days were difficult. Anna woke up on a couch instead of a luxury bed, with no assistants to prepare her breakfast or drivers to take her wherever she wanted. But there was something in that simplicity that brought her peace. To survive, she got a job at a small bakery. She didn't earn much, but every coin had real value. Her hands learned to knead bread. Her heart was filled with every smile from her customers. And her soul found purpose when she began to help those who had even less than her. At night, when tiredness overcame her, she took refuge in her faith. She prayed fervently, asking for strength to carry on. Little by little, sadness turned into determination. The divorce was made official months later. Marcos did not even attend the final hearing. For him, the chapter was closed. For Anna, it was the beginning of her true story. But life still had many surprises in store for both of them. The sound of glass clinking in a toast echoed throughout the exclusive nightclub where Marcos was celebrating another successful business deal. Surrounded by ambitious businessmen and stunning women, he felt invincible. "For money and power," he said, raising his glass arrogantly. "But fortune, like destiny, is capricious." Months later, a financial storm shook the market. At first, Marcos was not worried. He had survived crises before. However, this time, the red numbers in his accounts were not temporary. Million-dollar investments began to collapse, and the banks stopped being allies and became executioners. One winter morning, he received the call he never thought he would hear. "Marcos, I'm sorry, but we can't keep covering the losses. We're out." He was his most trusted partner, or so he thought. "You can't do this to me. It's just business," the voice on the other end of the line replied before hanging up. The betrayal hit him harder than the financial ruin. From one day to the next, the doors that were always open to him closed without warning. Luxury meetings were replaced by ignored calls. One morning, arriving at his office in the tallest tower in the city, he found the doors locked. A security guard stopped him. "Sir, the company no longer belongs to you." That's when he realized his empire, built with years of work and ego, had collapsed in a matter of months. Alone and without resources, Marcos went out into the street feeling as if the world was mocking him. The man who once had everything now had nothing, and the worst was yet to come. Dawn was painting the sky in shades of orange when Anna opened the doors of her small coffee shop for the first time. It wasn't a flashy or ostentatious business, but it had something that none of Marcos's businesses had had: purpose. With the help of Laura and some friends, he had managed to transform a humble place into a refuge for those who needed more than a coffee. In every cup served, there was a message of hope. In every customer served, an opportunity to share a smile. But the real change in her life came when she met Samuel, a retired businessman who visited the bakery every morning. He was a man with a calm gaze and wise words. "You have a gift, Anna," he said one day, watching her as she served a mother and her child. "You don't just sell coffee, you offer something that money can't buy." "Hope." Anna smiled modestly. "I only do what I think is right." "And that's why you have to think big," Samuel insisted. "People like you can change lives, but you need to learn to lead." Intrigued, Anna began meeting with him. Samuel taught her about management, leadership, and most importantly, how to grow a business without losing its essence. Over time, the cafe became more than just a shop. It became a support center for people in difficult situations. Anna started to organize employment workshops, self-improvement classes, and community events. What started as a small dream became a movement, and unbeknownst to her, her story was beginning to resonate in places she never imagined. While Anna flourished in another part of the city, Mark descended deeper and deeper into his own darkness. The rain was pounding on the pavement as Marcos left the last hotel he could afford. Reality hit him as coldly as the night wind. No money, no friends, no place to take shelter. The last few weeks had been a downward spiral. First, he lost his properties, then his luxury car, then the few contacts that still responded to him. His phone, which had previously been ringing off the hook with business calls, now served only to watch his bank account get emptier by the day. Desperate, he turned to alcohol. With each bottle, he tried to find an answer, but found only more emptiness. His arrogance had turned to bitterness, his confidence to despair. One evening, after spending the night in a cheap bar, he was thrown out of the place for not being able to pay. Staggering through the dirty streets, he saw his reflection in a shop window. He didn't recognize the man standing before him. His sunken eyes, his unkempt beard, his wrinkled and dirty clothes. That wasn't Marcos, the successful businessman. With what little pride he had left, he tried to call for help. "Laura!" She called her old friend on the phone, her voice breaking. "I need a place to stay." "I'm sorry, Marcos, but I can't do that," she replied firmly. "We all warned you. Now you must face the consequences." The call was cut off. No one was coming to rescue him. That night, with no other options, he lay down on a park bench. The rain began to fall again, soaking him to the bone. The man who once slept in the most expensive bed in the city now spent the night outdoors, with only a piece of cardboard as his blanket. Fate had taught him the cruelest lesson. He who had always looked down on the weak was now one of them. But I hadn't hit rock bottom yet. Not quite. The hunger was unbearable. Marcos had gone days without a decent bite to eat. He had lost track of time, surviving on scraps found in the trash and small favors from strangers who looked at him with pity. That afternoon, his body barely had the strength to continue walking. He leaned against the wall of a building when a familiar aroma invaded his senses. Freshly baked bread. His stomach growled with fury. Following the scent, he came to a small church. At the entrance, a group of people were serving food to the needy. Mark felt a surge of wounded pride. He was not a beggar, but his hunger was stronger than his ego. "Brother, do you want a plate of food?" asked a man with a kind smile. He nodded silently and allowed himself to be led to a table. The warm bread and thick soup were the best things he had tasted in months. "I haven't seen you around here before," the man continued. "I'm Pastor Daniel." "I just need to eat, nothing more," Marcos replied dryly. The shepherd did not insist. He let him finish his meal in peace. But before Marcos got up to leave, he said something that resonated in his mind. "God brought you here for a reason. When you are ready to listen, He will speak to your heart." Marcos didn't answer, but that night, for the first time in a long time, he felt something different. A small spark of hope. He did not yet know that this meeting would be the first step in his transformation. Hunger and cold were his only companions when Marcos woke up on the park bench. His body ached, his mind was clouded, and hopelessness hung over him like a shadow. He couldn't remember when he had last eaten, and his stomach rumbled with a pain he had never experienced before. He walked aimlessly through the streets, his clothes dirty and his gaze lost. People avoided him, as if he were invisible, or worse, as if he were a nuisance. The man who had once commanded respect was now just a specter from the past. The aroma of hot food drew him to a small neighborhood church. Through the half-open door, he saw a group of people sitting around a long table, sharing bread and soup. His pride screamed at him to turn away, but his need pushed him inside. A middle-aged man, with a kind smile and eyes full of compassion, approached him. "Welcome, friend. Sit down and have something to eat," she said, offering him a plate. Marcos hesitated. His hands shook as he picked up the spoon, not only because he was hungry, but because for the first time in his life, he was dependent on the kindness of others. After several bites, she looked up and met the man's gaze. "I'm Pastor Daniel," he introduced himself. "Everyone is welcome here." Marcos swallowed with difficulty. "I don't believe in these things," he said hoarsely. Daniel was unfazed. "You don't have to believe in anything right now. Just rest. When you're ready to talk, I'll be here." That night, for the first time in a long time, Marcos did not sleep on the street. He stayed in the small church, surrounded by strangers who asked him for nothing in return. He didn't understand why they were helping him. He didn't understand what this warmth in his chest was. But something inside him, something that had been dormant for years, was beginning to awaken. The morning sun illuminated the cafe as Anna organized the paperwork for her small business. Since that first day she opened the doors, everything had changed. What began as a simple shelter for her new life had become a space of hope for many people. With the support of Samuel and her new community, Anna learned to run her business with vision and purpose. Her cafe no longer just served coffee and bread, but had transformed into a hub of opportunities. She organized employment workshops for single mothers, cooking classes for unemployed youth, and motivational talks where she shared her story of resilience. Social media began to talk about her. Her story, that of a woman who rebuilt herself from scratch, became an inspiration for thousands. Businessmen and organizations became interested in collaborating with her project. Invitations to interviews and conferences began to arrive. "You are an example for many people, Anna," Samuel told her one afternoon while they were reviewing new proposals. "But don't forget the most important thing." She looked up. "What thing?" "That all of this grew because you put your heart into it. Don't let success make you forget why you started." Anna nodded, feeling the depth of those words. She wasn't looking for fame or recognition, she just wanted to make a difference. One day, while organizing a food delivery for homeless people, a journalist approached her. "Your story has touched many lives," he told her sincerely. "How did you manage to overcome so much pain?" Anna smiled humbly. "I learned that true success is not measured in money, but in how many lives you can impact." Unbeknownst to her, someone else was watching that interview from a small television in the church where she had found refuge. Marcos's eyes widened in disbelief when he saw Anna on the screen. "It can't be," he whispered. The woman he had despised, the one he considered insignificant, was now a figure of respect and admiration. For the first time, Marcos understood that he had lost something much more valuable than his fortune. Anna's words echoed in his mind like a persistent echo. Ever since that night in church, when he saw her on television, Marcos had been unable to stop thinking about her. Not only because of the surprise of her transformation, but because of the bitter truth that had been stamped on his conscience. While he was sinking, Anna had grown, prospered, and found a purpose. Ashamed of what he had become, he decided to accept Pastor Daniel's help. It was not easy. His pride still whispered to him that he did not need anyone's pity, but reality proved him wrong. "If you really want to change, start from the bottom," the pastor told him one morning while they were organizing food pantries to distribute to people in need. "Learn to serve before you want to recover what you lost." The words hit him like a slap in the face. He, who had always been served, now had to learn to serve. The first few days were tough. Marcos, accustomed to luxury and power, now swept the floors of the church, helped in the kitchen, and distributed food to people he would have previously ignored on the street. Each action felt like a humiliation, but over time, something inside him began to change. He began to hear the stories of those who came to him seeking help, people who had gone through even tougher trials than his own. Little by little, he understood that the world did not revolve around his ego. Despite his progress, the shadow of his past still haunted him. His old habits and arrogant thoughts tried to surface in his mind. On more than one occasion, he felt the urge to abandon everything and look for an easy way out. "It won't be an easy road, Marcos," Daniel warned him one night after noticing his anguish. "Real change requires time and will." Marcos sighed, looking at his hands, now hardened by work. "I don't know if I can do it. Nobody knows at first, but if you got this far, it's because there's something inside you that still wants to fight." For the first time in his life, Mark wasn't chasing money, power, or recognition. He was chasing something much more elusive, his own redemption, and the real challenge was yet to come. Weeks passed and Mark continued his path of transformation, although he still struggled with his own pride and doubts. Despite having found refuge in the church, something inside him still resisted the idea of true faith. He wondered if it all really made sense, or if he was just looking for an escape from his failure. One night, while helping to organize a vigil at church, he felt restless. Pastor Daniel had insisted that he attend, but Mark wasn't sure he wanted to stay. But as people began to arrive, he sensed something different in the air, a warm energy, a feeling of peace he'd never experienced before. The service began with songs, followed by testimonies from people who had found a second chance in life. Marcos listened in silence, arms crossed, until an older man spoke. "Years ago, I had it all too," the old man said in a calm voice. "Money, business, power, until I lost it all. I thought my life was meaningless, that I could never recover. But God showed me that a man's worth is not in what he has, but in what he is." Marcos felt that those words were directed directly at him. His heart was pounding. Suddenly, a lump formed in his throat and an unknown emotion invaded him. That's when it happened. A woman in a wheelchair, who had not walked for years, was called forward. Church leaders prayed for her fervently. Mark watched skeptically, convinced that it was just an act. But suddenly, the woman began to move her legs with difficulty. First a tremor, then a hesitant attempt. And finally, she stood up. The silence in the church was deathly quiet before shouts of joy and tears broke out. Mark was paralyzed. He had seen many things in his life, but nothing like this. His eyes filled with tears, but he could not help it. For the first time, he felt like there was something bigger than himself around him. Something he couldn't explain with logic or money. That night, she knelt in the church, her face in her hands, and whispered the words she thought she would never say. "God, if you're really there, help me." And in that instant, without knowing how or why, he felt a deep peace flood through him, as if a burden he had carried for years had finally vanished. He didn't fully understand what had happened. He only knew that for the first time in his life, he felt there was hope. Marcos woke up the next day feeling different. It wasn't a radical change or an instant transformation, But for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the overwhelming weight of emptiness. Something inside him had been lit the night before, something he couldn't explain with words, but it drove him forward. He decided to talk to Pastor Daniel. "Last night, I felt something," he confessed awkwardly. "I don't know what it was, but I want to understand it." Daniel smiled patiently. "God works in ways we don't always understand, Mark, but the next step is yours. If you really want to change, you must begin to heal the wounds you left behind in the past." Those words hit him hard. It wasn't just about rebuilding his life. It was about facing those he had hurt. The first name that came to mind was Anna. It took days to work up the courage to do so, but finally, with his heart pounding, Mark wrote a message. "Anna, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from. I don't expect anything from you, but I want to apologize. Not just for what happened between us, but for the way I treated you. I was wrong, and if one day you can hear me, I'd like to talk to you." He sent the message and waited. Minutes passed, then hours, and finally an entire day without a reply. He sighed. He couldn't blame her. For years, he had ignored her, belittled her, and humiliated her. He couldn't expect a simple apology to change everything, but he did not give up. He knew that redemption was not an easy or quick path. He decided to move forward, to show with actions that he was changing. He began to get more involved in the church, helping with community projects and supporting those going through situations he himself had experienced. He discovered a strange satisfaction in serving others, something he had never felt before. Little by little, people began to trust him. Some still looked at him with suspicion, knowing who he had been in the past. But Mark was not looking for approval. He just wanted to do the right thing. One day, while delivering food to a shelter, his phone vibrated with an unexpected message. "Marcos, I don't know what to say. I'm surprised to receive this message. I'm not ready to talk yet, but I appreciate your words." It was Anna. Marcos closed his eyes and smiled slightly. It wasn't a pardon, or even a chance to see her, but it was a start. The path to redemption was not built in a day, but for the first time I was certain that I was on the right path. Anna's message was like a ray of hope in Marcos's life. It didn't mean that she had forgiven him, but at least she had read his words. Days passed, then weeks, and although he received no other answer, he decided to continue with his transformation. He learned to work with humility, to listen instead of imposing his will, and to value every small step along his way. One afternoon, while helping organize a charity event at church, Pastor Daniel approached with an enigmatic smile. "Today you will receive an unexpected visit." Marcos frowned, but before he could ask what it meant, the sound of heels echoed in the entrance. He turned around and felt his heart stop for a second. It was Anna. She looked different, more confident, stronger, with a natural elegance that had nothing to do with the luxury of her past. She was wearing a simple blouse and a light coat, but what was most striking was the firmness in her gaze. For a moment, neither of them knew what to say. So much time had passed, and yet in that instant, the weight of the past was all around them. "Hello, Marcos," Anna finally said, her voice calm but cautious. "Hi," he replied, feeling a lump in his throat. They remained silent until Anna sighed and crossed her arms. "I read your message. It took me a while to process it, but I wanted to see you in person to understand what has changed." Marcos nodded, aware that words were not enough. "I know that nothing I say will erase the damage I did to you. I'm not here to ask you for anything. I just want you to know that I've changed, not because life forced me to, but because I understood that the person I was before wasn't someone worthy of you." Anna stared at him, evaluating every word, every gesture. "Life changes for all of us, Marcos. I've changed too. I'm no longer the woman who once let you belittle me." "I know," he said humbly, "and I'm glad." Anna took a deep breath and looked around, observing the church, the people who worked with him. "I don't know if I'm ready to forgive everything that happened, but I wanted to come because I felt it was the right thing to do." Marcos nodded with a slight smile. "That's more than I could have hoped for." They remained silent for a moment longer, until Anna took a step back. "Take care, Marcos." "You too, Anna." He watched her walk away, feeling a strange peace inside him. He didn't know if she would ever fully forgive him, but that wasn't the most important thing anymore. What mattered was that he had had the chance to look into the eyes of the woman he once failed to value, and show her that he was a different man now. The past could not be changed, but the present was still in his hands. Meeting Anna again left Marcos with a bittersweet feeling. He had been waiting for this moment, but now he understood that forgiveness and trust were not restored overnight. However, he was not discouraged. For the first time in his life, he accepted that some things had to be won with actions and not with words. His journey was not over yet. One night, while organizing supplies at the shelter, Pastor Daniel approached him with a serious expression. "Marcos, there is something else you need to do." "Tell me what it is," he answered without hesitation. "Until now, you have learned to serve and help others, but true change is shown when you decide to do something without expecting anything in return." Those words remained engraved in his mind. Marcos wondered what else he could do, until on a visit to a poor neighborhood where the church was bringing food, he saw a scene that left a deep mark on him. A mother with two small children tried to protect herself from the rain with an old tarp, her children shivering from the cold, huddled next to her. Marcos felt a lump in his throat. He remembered the night he himself had slept on the street, alone and desperate. Without thinking twice, he approached them. "I'm going to help them," he said, with a confidence that surprised even himself. She used the little savings she had gathered from her church work and arranged a temporary place for the family. Then, with the help of the shelter, she organized a support network to find employment for the woman and ensure that her children had an education. It wasn't easy. He encountered bureaucratic obstacles, people who doubted his intentions, and his own fear of failure. But for the first time in his life, he didn't give up. When he finally managed to settle the family in a small apartment and ensure that the children went to school, something inside him changed forever. He hadn't done it for recognition or to clear his conscience. He had done it because he understood what a person's worth really meant, not in what he possessed, but in what he was willing to give. One afternoon, as he watched the children playing in their new home, he felt a peace he had never experienced before. "This is your final challenge, Marcos," he whispered to himself, "not to prove to anyone that you have changed, but to prove to yourself who you really are now." At that moment, he knew his transformation was complete. The days passed, and with each new dawn, Marcos felt more at peace with himself. Not because everything was resolved, but because for the first time in his life, he had clarity about who he wanted to be. He was no longer the arrogant man who had looked down on others, nor was he the defeated man who had lost everything. He was now someone who had learned the true meaning of life: to serve, to love, and to find purpose in helping others. Opportunities began to come in unexpected ways. Because of his dedication to the church and the shelter, he was offered a permanent position with a charity. His job was to coordinate projects to help homeless people, like he himself had been in some time ago. He accepted without hesitation. It was not a luxurious or high-paying job, but it gave him something much more valuable: the chance to make a difference. One day, while organizing a donation drive at the community center, she received an unexpected visitor. It was Anna. This time, there was no distance or tension between them. There was respect, a silent understanding of everything they had experienced. "I heard what you did for that family," she said with a soft smile. "I saw the story on the news." Marcos laughed lightly. "I didn't do anything extraordinary, just what I had to do." Anna looked at him carefully. There was something in his gaze, something that hadn't been there the last time they met. Recognition. "I'm glad to see you're okay, Marcos." "And I'm glad to see you happy, Anna." They stood in silence for a moment, as if they were closing the last chapter of their story together. There were no hard feelings, only gratitude for the lessons life had given them. Anna nodded with a final smile and said goodbye. This time, there was no bitter goodbye or painful farewell. Just two people who had followed different paths but had finally found their peace. The past could not be changed, but the present was still in his hands. Meeting Anna again left Marcos with a bittersweet feeling. He had been waiting for this moment, but now he understood that forgiveness and trust were not restored overnight. However, he was not discouraged. For the first time in his life, he accepted that some things had to be won with actions and not with words. His journey was not over yet. One night, while organizing supplies at the shelter, Pastor Daniel approached him with a serious expression. "Marcos, there is something else you need to do." "Tell me what it is," he answered without hesitation. "Until now, you have learned to serve and help others, but true change is shown when you decide to do something without expecting anything in return." Those words remained engraved in his mind. Marcos wondered what else he could do, until on a visit to a poor neighborhood where the church was bringing food, he saw a scene that left a deep mark on him. A mother with two small children tried to protect herself from the rain with an old tarp, her children shivering from the cold, huddled next to her. Marcos felt a lump in his throat. He remembered the night he himself had slept on the street, alone and desperate. Without thinking twice, he approached them. "I'm going to help them," he said, with a confidence that surprised even himself. She used the little savings she had gathered from her church work and arranged a temporary place for the family. Then, with the help of the shelter, she organized a support network to find employment for the woman and ensure that her children had an education. It wasn't easy. He encountered bureaucratic obstacles, people who doubted his intentions, and his own fear of failure. But for the first time in his life, he didn't give up. When he finally managed to settle the family in a small apartment and ensure that the children went to school, something inside him changed forever. He hadn't done it for recognition or to clear his conscience. He had done it because he understood what a person's worth really meant, not in what he possessed, but in what he was willing to give. One afternoon, as he watched the children playing in their new home, he felt a peace he had never experienced before. "This is your final challenge, Marcos," he whispered to himself. "Not to prove to anyone that you have changed, but to prove to yourself who you really are now." At that moment, he knew his transformation was complete. The days passed, and with each new dawn, Marcos felt more at peace with himself. Not because everything was resolved, but because for the first time in his life, he had clarity about who he wanted to be. He was no longer the arrogant man who had looked down on others, nor was he the defeated man who had lost everything. He was now someone who had learned the true meaning of life: to serve, to love, and to find purpose in helping others. Opportunities began to come in unexpected ways. Because of his dedication to the church and the shelter, he was offered a permanent position with a charity. His job was to coordinate projects to help homeless people, like he himself had been in some time ago. He accepted without hesitation. It was not a luxurious or high-paying job, but it gave him something much more valuable: the chance to make a difference. One day, while organizing a donation drive at the community center, she received an unexpected visitor. It was Anna. This time, there was no distance or tension between them. There was respect, a silent understanding of everything they had experienced. "I heard what you did for that family," she said with a soft smile. "I saw the story on the news." Marcos laughed lightly. "I didn't do anything extraordinary, just what I had to do." Anna looked at him carefully. There was something in his gaze, something that hadn't been there the last time they met. Recognition. "I'm glad to see you're okay, Marcos." "And I'm glad to see you happy, Anna." They stood in silence for a moment, as if they were closing the last chapter of their story together. There were no hard feelings, only gratitude for the lessons life had given them. Anna nodded with a final smile and said goodbye. This time, there was no bitter goodbye or painful farewell. Just two people who had followed different paths but had finally found their peace. When she left, Marcos took a deep breath. He looked around at the people he was now helping, at the place where he had found purpose. His life was completely different from what he had imagined years ago. But for the first time, he felt complete. And that, more than any wealth or success, was the true meaning of starting over. Time passed, and life went on. Marcos continued his work at the charity, dedicating his days to helping others like him, those who one day hit rock bottom and needed a hand to get back up. "I had learned to live with less, but to feel much more. I no longer sought power or validation from others. I now found satisfaction in small acts of kindness, in each person I managed to restore hope to." Anna, for her part, continued to grow in her mission. Her coffee shop expanded to other neighborhoods and became a symbol of change and improvement. Her lectures inspired thousands of people, and her story was told as a testimony of resilience and faith. One day at a community event, their paths crossed again. It was a day of aid for needy families, and both had been invited by different organizations. When their eyes met, there was no surprise or tension, just mutual understanding. "It seems that fate insists on bringing us together," Anna said with a sincere smile. "Maybe he still had something to teach us," Marcos replied calmly. They spent the afternoon sharing anecdotes, talking about their lives without any need for reproaches or regrets. They had changed, they had grown, and above all, they had found their paths. When the event ended, they walked together to the exit. "I'm glad to see you happy, Anna," Marcos said with genuine gratitude. "And I'm glad to see you at peace, Marcos," she replied. "That's the most important thing." They said goodbye with a smile, knowing that there were no more open wounds between them. Fate had come full circle, not as a love story being rewritten, but as a story of redemption, growth, and second chances. And with that, everyone went their own way, with the certainty that life, in its own way, always leads to where one really needs to be. The story of Marcos and Anna reminds us that life is a journey of constant learning. Sometimes pride blinds us, pain consumes us, and falls seem to have no end. But there is always the opportunity to change, to rebuild ourselves and to find a new purpose. Success is not found in wealth or power, but in the ability to transform our own hearts. Mark lost everything to find what was most valuable: humility, faith, and true peace. Anna, on the other hand, discovered her strength and showed that the greatest victory is to move forward without resentment, with one's eyes set on the future. If this story touched your heart, remember that it's never too late to start over. No matter how far you feel you've fallen, there's always a way back. And maybe, just maybe, life still has an unexpected twist in store for you that will take you where you truly belong.